Hello, I'm Arthur Mrozowski. I'm about 40 some years veteran here of this Silicon Valley. So I've been in a lot of startups, some successes, some failures. And recently, I'm running a boutique company, venture capital company called Silicon Hill Ventures with one of the co-founders of Netflix. And then we've been investing pre-seed monies to a lot of life science companies, but mostly focusing on IoT and the media. And I would like to welcome everybody to the healthcare opportunities in healthcare panel. And I've just listened to Farb that from Thrive Bioscience that has a wonderful overview of what's really happening in the nitty gritty of his company, but I'll let him talk about it. And we have quite a few unrelated questions to what it is that he's talked about it. But also in the panel, we have a Rich Gupta, partner of Rama Crowd Fund Capital. And then we have Krish Ramadaroy. I'm sorry if I did I pronounce it right? Ramadaroy?
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you, Arthur.
I know, from Harmonix Fund. And then I will start with you, Krish, if you could introduce yourself and tell us about what is it that you do, and then we'll go to each individual panelist and let them introduce, and then we'll start our discussion.
Excellent. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and see everyone virtually. I'm Chris, one of the partners at Harmonix Fund. We're a early stage venture capital fund investing at the intersection of healthcare, life sciences, and deep technology. We invest in all things computationally driven and platform enabled, everything from AI-driven drug discovery in synthetic biology and biomanufacturing to next generation critical infrastructure and space technology companies. We currently have 40 portfolio companies with a cumulative enterprise valuation of over $6 billion across the portfolio. And our team are a bunch of scientists, researchers, and engineers dedicated to accelerating the next generation of scientific breakthroughs to advance humanity forward.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Rich. And then next one, I have Rich Gupta. If you could tell us about yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, all. Thank you very much, Marty, for inviting. We run a multifamily office outside LA. Prior to multifamily office, pretty much worked and ran major Wall Street companies in New York City. And then around 2004, 2005, decided that we don't want to work for anybody. And we came to set up a new entity. And then we all know what happened in 2008, 2007, 2008. So since then, pretty much became independent and no more corporate allegiance to any corporate companies. And we, 7 of us, all of us are ex-Wall Street asset side or buy side or sell side companies. And we focus mostly in health tech, fintech, and anything blockchain crypto assets.
Well, thank you so much. And then Thomas Forrest Farb, co-founder and CEO and board member of Thrive Bioscience. He just he was on the previous panel, but let you, Tom, reintroduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. So just briefly, I've actually started 11 companies, but I also have worked in larger companies. I've run mid-sized pharmaceutical companies, public companies. And I've also been on the investing side. I think every operator, manager should be on the investment side for a period of time to understand that perspective, or they can read Sal Buscemi's book about investing. And also investors should spend time operating a company so they understand that world. So I did start a fund in China, started and ran a fund in China. Sole LP was the city of Shanghai. And we invested mostly in life sciences company. My first investment was my best investment. It was downhill from there. It was a 200x investment in a company called Wuxi AppTech, which is a multi-billion-dollar CRO. When I invested it was about 8 million in revenues. There were other good investments after that, but I should have just closed the fund at that point.
Great, great. Well, so let me start with you, Chris. Let's talk about today's opportunities in the healthcare market, right? We all know that the times came in; they're a little bit uncertain. And then what's your view on today's VC financing for the healthcare? What are the startups or anything that you're looking into investing in, or what is it that you're evaluating for funding?
Absolutely, excellent question. And certainly, given the shift in the market, VCs have been certainly more scrupulous when it comes to asset allocation and investment. I think a lot of us have been mainly checking in with our portfolio founders, making sure everyone has runway and has key value inflection points and are on track to achieve them. I think with a lot of early stage founders in healthcare life sciences right now, what we've been strategically looking for is, now that the market has transitioned from this growth mindset more to a value-based mindset, been really keen on making sure that these companies can back up and say and achieve what they're trying to envision for the company. And for us, that's having a line of sight to definable OKRs and key performance indicators so that the company can ultimately become sustainable and value driven. And for us, as a firm, I like to do valuation and validation as a 1-to-1 ratio. And I think sticking to, finding those companies that do have a path to revenue generation that can scale. And most importantly, in healthcare, where it's very difficult to vertically integrate, having a line of sight to being able to functionally expand and integrate into major healthcare institutions. And as you know, there's such a dissonance between the payers, the providers, and the investors, and trying to map out how can we logically be able to define a plan to scale these interventions to ultimately improve patients is something that's been important. So for all of our companies, a lot of them have done workflow automation across digital pathology to radiology to dermatology and all the other ologies. So what we've been keen is making sure that physicians have a very strong incentive structure to adopt the technology, as well as the institutions, because as you know, oftentimes it's the administrators running the show. So the incentive structure behind the product deployment and ultimately adoption has to be equalized both on the provider to have them actually be incentivized to use the technology so that they can increase their optimize their workflows so they can get either address patients quicker and faster or more efficaciously, but also be able to get home at the end of the day easier. We talk to a lot of physicians and burnout is a huge thing. So anything that can be a functional tool to optimize them, but also be incentivized both on the billing side as well for the institution to adopt has been critical. So I think now with the market turn, a lot of funds have been very keen on seeing are there indeed path to revenue generation. For a lot of our Series A companies, we typically like to see 1 to 2 million in revenue. Is that line of sight with the team and the management team there to achieve, those inflection points for the next round of financing? And I think if anything, everybody's been more scrupulous on that. And then ultimately, we want these technologies to be realized. I love vision. And I'm always saying, well, we can do the loon shot, but let's get to the moon first. And I think that's something that we've been cognizant with all of our companies. So as the market shift, I think having an operational game plan, staying lean and mean with great management teams, and then being able to have a line of sight to those value inflection points is critical. Sorry, that was a long explanation.
No, that's good. That's good. And I'm going to give a chance to talk to Rich about what it is that he's doing right now in the space. What is his interest in the terms of the investment and any experience and any futurology to say what's happening that it's cool in the healthcare opportunities.
Well, as Chris alluded to, I mean, the landscape of investment has drastically changed. So any new money we are deploying, we are very careful as to what has happened in the past, what are the entrepreneurs going through it, and especially when we focus mostly in health tech side of it or medical delivery side of the process, especially in a senior housing or anything to do with telemedicine or telehealth, that those are the factors we've been focused on for the last 6-7 years. And we finally saw the growth in each one of those verticals in a massive way. And now it's getting more standardized, but it's still the entrepreneurs. I think the basic is, especially in the environment where the future cash are coming in as a third raise or fourth raise, because we are mostly looking at the companies who are at the growth stage. We don't fund any startups. We don't look to do very early growth either. We get involved when there's at least the revenue projections, production, and there's some massive contracts. So I can talk about 2 or 3 specifics if you would like to talk about, but I can tell you this, the landscape of health tech as a whole with this COVID has become a massive explosion on a growth potential for telehealth or anything vertically within even the medical offices. The whole idea of that paper and getting all the EMR records right is explosion of growth. But the companies we have funded to date, they're all very stable. Obviously, they are hurting through it. And our challenge always is with entrepreneurs is, how are you watching your cash flows and how are you spending the cash flow? And those 2 things are always the biggest challenge for entrepreneurs because they are busy building the company, especially in health tech or telemedicine. These are some backgrounds of physicians or scientists or engineering background, and they don't have that financial control or operational control as much as they should be paying attention to. We come in, we walk them through the process, and especially now, the new checks are very tight to write. The health tech we are looking at is the 2 companies specifically I can talk to where we are seeing more and more, 2 industries where we're seeing more and more is senior housing, where we see a lot more activity going on, where the seniors' health is being more electronically monitored and provide a solution to. The second would be on the telehealth side, where more and more specialized activities, surgery, non-emergency surgeries are happening, where a system could be developed. And we are advising 2 or 3 companies. We invested money in one company on this area as well. And we're moving along. The path is wide open to utilize the resources of all the cloud-based technologies and solution, and that's where we see growth going through.
Thank you. Since Tom was already talking about his company quite a bit, I'm going to ask him a question that more pertains to a very simple question. An obvious question is, how has the COVID-19 changed opportunities in the healthcare life sciences?
So I'll focus on the area that I know the best, which is the research side, preclinical side. So the impact of COVID-19 on the research side is less known, less visible. People are much more aware of the delivery side, but it's an incredible testament to the research side that we were able to produce a vaccine as quickly as we did, several vaccines. But if you go back and look at the initial months of the United States response to COVID-19, the CDC selected a cell line that they thought represented the best cell line for studying and producing regulatory data, and they were wrong. And so 2 months after, they revised the cell line that everyone needed to use. We could have helped with that. So the effects of COVID-19 on research have actually been immense, and it shows the importance of streamlining, increasing speed, and and so having more and better tools that collect data that cause you not to have to do an experiment 5 times in order to reconfirm it. And by the way, if you do an experiment 5 times with mislabeled and manual processes, and you get 2 answers that are the same out of the 5, those both could just be 2 wrong answers. It's emphasized the need for speed, for better tools. It also showed the importance of manufacturing and particularly bioprocessing side. There were companies that failed in that. Emergent is a public company that's an example of that. So it wasn't just the research side. When I say preclinical, it's also the logistics and the ability to manufacture. And so there was just tremendous amount of stress put on that whole side, the preclinical side. It did incredibly well, but that was kind of luck. So I think there's going to be an increasing focus on productivity, tools that in fact reduce the failure rates, because when you have very little time, you don't want to be pursuing the wrong thing.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I'd like to ask you, Krish, about other things. For example, when you take today's healthcare in general and the opportunities, we know that everybody's been reforming all the operation in the fintech, right? Do you invest in any companies that are trying to change the way that the healthcare insurance is working?
Yeah. So we've done plays in medical affairs, analytics, clinical workflow automation, digital health, clinical decision support, and digital surgery. And the unifying theme is indeed the CPT CMS reimbursement and insurance billing protocols associated with all of them. Working with those agencies, it's, as you know, the defining moment for a lot of these companies is CMS and CPT code reimbursement by the institutions. And we've seen a lot of very unique automation plays on the billings and claims authorization side. I think there's a lot of potential. There's much like life sciences, there's a lot of manual redundant workflows in healthcare that are still being done manually. And I think case assessment for patients is one of them. And oftentimes any type of workflow automation that's done in space, especially when it comes to insurance billing or medical affairs analytics, the teams are typically hyper constrained, and any type of tool that can optimize and accelerate their workflows and act as a workflow multiplier tends to get great traction and adoption. And we've seen players like Aetna and Blue Cross Blue Shield, et cetera, really working to integrate these next generation functional technologies into their workflows, but also standardize them as opposed to just pilot test them. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that at least for all the companies in our portfolio, we're keen on having these automation-based approaches not be vitamins, but painkillers, so that they can be structurally built in and adopted and implemented at the end of the day, as opposed to kind of a fun pet project for a large corporate to play around with, but it doesn't really get out of the demo mode. And I think that's similar for insurance and billing. It's certainly a lot, because the customer lead times in healthcare and life sciences and biopharma are quite extensive, generally 15 to 18 months to get a contract negotiated if you're really on it. So I think if you have the right team that understands that BD environment with the technology that can be functionally integrated and scaled and also bespoke for those customers that are typically more traditional, like that are in billing and insurance is important. So we certainly have looked at the play at that environment and are excited to explore it more. So,
well, thanks, Rich. I wanted to ask you pretty much the same question. Are you looking into any like a startups as opposed to in that field as opposed to work with existing legacy companies as far as the insurance tech is concerned? Is that coming across your desk?
We did. I also advise as an individual to small startups or early growth stage companies. So we fell into a lap of one company whose founder was so charismatic. He is an ENT surgeon, and he was building, especially on the health tech side, a technology solution for non-emergency surgeries. And he built the whole technology behind it. And the biggest challenge was, how do we get paid? How do we get paid for this company? And talking to insurance companies and CMS. I mean, I tell you this, when I started looking at telehealth companies around 2007, there was no code available to put for telehealth services. And we funded a very early startup company called Symptom Control. For the lack of acceptance, I mean, that company had to be folded and the tech had to be repurposed and all that. But now with the CMS and with insurance companies, especially on the health tech, and I can only speak to health tech and anything to do with med tech as well. And there, I think CMS is wide open, so is insurance companies. This company, which I advised and eventually we funded them, is basically created a new platform to provide for new anything non-emergency surgeries. And guess what? Who's knocking their doors right now is all the names which Chris mentioned and all the major employers. Major employers are self-insured entities, and their cost of insurance every year goes up between 7 to 12%. And one of the major costs of that insurance is non-emergency surgeries. So it became apparent that that solution which these folks came up with, and they provided a solution, it was the right time and the right approach. So, I would say insurance companies and CMS is very proactive at this point.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much. I watched, Tom, your previous presentation. I was really impressed, and then it reminded me what it is that you do at the Thrive Bioscience of what Carl Sagan back in the 70s was explaining, a two-dimensional world, and then he put it in the fourth dimension into the figure that was called the tesseract or something like that. I'm not quite sure if I pronounce it correctly, meaning that you have a totally different vision onto our existing world, and then and your findings, and then actually measuring, like looking at each individual cell in a 3-dimension. I think it's just ingenious, but I wanted to lead into the actual question that relates to the actual cost of doing business, pretty much. So when you develop nowadays any kind of a drug, what is the main aspect of your investments that can produce a successful drug for future use?
Thank you for your comments on Thrive, and I'll answer the question if it's okay, looking at Thrive, and then but also more generally. So the effect that Thrive has is very comparable to what one sees in almost any segment that has been converted from the analog world to the digital world, which is better collection of data. But that data has to be in a form that's enabling, and there's a lot of times where it was the wrong data. So making sure that we have the right data, that it's accessible and actionable, can lead to a real improvement in the speed by which things are developed. Part of the reason that the drug prices are so high is we're paying for the failure rates of all the ones that didn't work have to be made up in the one that does. And the statistics are pretty astounding that at best, half of our preclinical research is reproducible and half is not. That's the most optimistic study. Amgen was 90% were not repeatable. There's never been one that's shown more than 50% repeatable. You take 50% of what's spent in the US on drug discovery, and that's about $25 billion a year just on the research side, not even on once you get into, into trials.
Mhm.
So collecting, having documentation, having data, having things that are verifiable, that are repeatable, and having them, done more quickly is incredibly important. In looking at it from kind of an investor's point of view, where are there opportunities to invest in ways that will decrease drug prices, because that's the direction it's going in. There's something like 25 times difference between OECD pricing and US pricing. And there's increasing pressure legislatively to decrease prices in the United States. So I think that one has to be looking at where companies that could potentially solve that problem. And I talked earlier about manufacturing. Manufacturing is an area that sometimes is really overlooked. People get very excited about a therapeutic because we have family members, et cetera, that have been affected, but all of them require things like good manufacturing. And so there are now a number of public companies that are basically called CDMOs or CMOs, which are contract manufacturing organizations. A lot of money has flowed into them. It's not as sexy as some of the other areas, but I think from a investing in healthcare point of view, in addition to tools, research tools, I would say the manufacturing of drugs, that's a key part of reducing costs. And there's also a manufacturing aspect to research tools. So I was talking about better data for research tools, which is what Farb is trying to do. Well, one of the things that we found, so our customers are some of the leading labs in the world, leading research institutes, and all of them have been and are suffering from shortage of things like cell culture plates, pipettes, microscopes, cameras that are used in digital cameras. And I said, I shouldn't have just said supply chain, because the demand has increased tremendously as well. And so I think that again, it shows the quality manufacturers that are providing tools that are really the picks and shovels is a really good place to be looking to invest.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much. Krish, just turning attention to you for a moment. I just wanted to find out from you in terms of the new era coming up with all of the great innovations like from companies like Tom's. What do you see the future, like the biggest innovation in the field in your portfolio companies? Who can you share it with us, telling us about what the future brings?
Yeah, I certainly echo Tom's sentiment on the compression cycle for preclinical drug development and overcoming all the barriers. I think the era of it costing $2 billion to have a drug developed and brought to market is over. And one of our companies, in silico medicine, they developed the world's first fully AI designed drug to enter clinical trials. They did it in under 18 months for less than $2 million. And it was a paradigm shift of, instead of taking 3 to 5 years and $20 to $50 million of preclinical drug development, you could optimize these with next generation computational approaches that are functionally validated and feasible, and actually deploy that in the field to create a truly superior biological asset in clinic, which hopefully has less of a clinical failure rate and translatability issue. So for us, I think we've really been excited about next generation single cell genomics, spatial transcriptomics, proteomics, all the omics that can be optimized by natural language processing and machine learning to really create these biological insights. And like Tom said, take all of this data and actually functionally take it and create a functional outcome that's definable and useful, as opposed to aggregating an incredible amount of metadata and not being able to functionally extrapolate useful insights from it to propel either an R&D process forward, a biological asset forward, or a healthcare process forward. So we're quite excited about that in this new era of what we call tech bio or deep biology, where these are not traditional biotech companies that are not only asset-based, but also are built almost like a tech company, similar to Tom's, where they have a functional end-to-end full stack modality that can optimize and create value across an entire spectrum of the chain, as opposed to being a single point modality in a system. And those are things that we're quite excited about. And obviously this next generation of 3D bioprinting and other unique modalities where we can compress these timeframes and optimize them so that less opportunity cost is associated with research and development, and more practical innovations are scaled to ultimately improve patient outcomes in humanity. So,
can I make a comment on what he just said, which is you mentioned an area which I think is a really attractive one for investment. He mentioned 3D bioprinting, and it relates to what I what I mentioned before, which is we get to observe all these labs. We call on hundreds of them every month, and probably the most exciting area within cell-based experiments is actually doing it on organoids. And that, in order to do that, you have to be able to make those organoids and to be able to study them. And then there's also the translational side, which is actually creating tissues that could be put back in. It's all part of kind of the same process. From the research side, what's important there is streamlining the drug discovery process so that we have something in between cells and mice, dogs, and pigs, which is expensive, and you want to try and screen out problems before. So the whole area of 3D bioprinting, and there are some public companies that are involved in that. I won't mention the names, but sort of your comment on from Sagan is really interesting one. And we are trying to make it 4 dimensions, the 4th dimension being kind of over time, not just single point in time. There are companies that are involved in the practical implementation of that, which is tissue engineering and 3D bioprinting, as Rich mentioned.
Very good.
Hey, Mark, if I can add on to what Chris and Tom just talked about, I can also share we are watching very interestingly on the development of blockchain and the idea of distributed technology to be utilized in drug discovery and research, where the data is constantly shared among participants in a more secure and enhanced manner. So we are seeing more and more developments of blockchain technology being utilized as well.
I apologize, it was Chris who made those comments.
That's right. Yeah.
Not Rich.
But actually, Rich, I think that we're just about to wrap up the panel, and I just wanted to have you kind of a summarize of what do you see from your standpoint of view of investment, and what are you thinking about doing in healthcare this year?
Well, I mean, we only focus on health tech and med tech delivery, and where we are focused on pretty much on anything. We are not looking at this point any new investment for remainder of the year, but where we see more and more developments happening, as I started talking about, is more technology being utilized. And Chris also talked about earlier as a drug discovery and research, discovering a drug in a much more efficient manner and timely. We see blockchain playing much more active role and much more enhanced role, either as most likely as a centralized blockchain instead of decentralized, and it will have some kind of protection of data so participants don't feel that they're not getting protection. And where we also see in health tech side of it is anything which is happening within the doctor's offices could be done in some technological manner. We are seeing a lot more activity on even remote help on operating theaters, which being coming up much more actively. And we have not invested anywhere there, but we're watching all that activity.
Well, I was wondering if anybody here in the audience has any question for the panel.